Sean Mulholland. First Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for a question. Communities in Transition is part of the Executive's programme on paramilitarism and organised crime, and since 2019 it has delivered over £26 million worth of support across 8 areas where there's been a significant history of activity and coercive control. The CIT areas were identified by independent research commissioned by the Tackling Paramilitarism Programme Board and completed in 2017. Researchers identified areas that were at a particular risk from ongoing paramilitary activity by analysing a range of data sources, including the media, data sets, academic literature, research report and stakeholder meetings. Areas were scored against a number of indicators of paramilitary activity, including verified and claimed incidents of paramilitary intimidation and paramilitary assaults and shootings.
Ms Mulholland.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Deputy First Minister, for your answer. So, given that we are 27 years on past the agreement, when will it be envisioned that we complete this kind of journey of transition, and so that some of those funds can be diverted into things like neighbourhood health projects or tackling rural equality, rural isolation, things like in my constituency, places like Armoy, that whilst they don't qualify,
I think we're getting
into
a statement. We've got the question, so I'll Deputy First Minister to respond.
Thank you. I thank the member for a supplementary question. Indeed, look, let's be very, very clear. There is absolutely no place for paramilitarism in 2025, and indeed, in my view, there was never any place for paramilitarism or paramilitary activity. Of course, in terms of the criminal aspects of that, the PSNI take the lead on that and must do everything in their power to ensure that those who are involved or continue to be involved in such behaviour are brought to justice. In terms of the community aspects of that, yes, there are many, many programmes right throughout government within many of the departments that deal with the very issues that the member rightly highlights. Of course, I think all ministers would want to do more of that. But this programme particularly looks at those that may be vulnerable to being dragged into this type of behaviour. And this is very much a programme that focuses on prevention and focuses on community resilience, particularly working with young people at risk to ensure that they do not end up going down this type of pathway. And that does include mental health programmes, training programmes, different types of community-based programmes, all based on that best practice.
Can I begin by first of all offering my apologies for I understand that I was called for a question last week. It was my understanding that the question had been withdrawn, so apologies. I'm not sure where the confusion was there, but I wasn't here due to a family emergency. So can I first of all thank the Deputy First Minister for her answer, and just want to put on the record that the really valuable contribution that Communities in Transition programme offers in building communities free from paramilitary and coercive control. Do you agree with me that building resilient and empowered communities with true co-design at grassroots level is the key to building blocks in tackling paramilitarism and organised crime within our communities?
Thank you. I thank the member for her question. Absolutely. You know, really over the course of the last 20 odd years I've worked within politics, I've seen a big change when it comes to this type of policy development and indeed even project and initiative development, much more towards that collaborative design, co-production approach. And I think actually these projects are much the stronger and much the better for that. We know that those who are on the ground very often are in the best position to both identify what the problems are and the barriers to success, but also to work to find those types of initiatives and interventions that will work best in the local areas that they serve and live in. So absolutely, I believe that that co-design process should be mainstreamed within all programmes, but it has particularly helped and supported the development of the projects under the CIT.
Matthew O'Toole.
Minister, 6 months ago nearly we gathered here to talk about the race riots in Belfast. Can you confirm whether your department has investigated whether any recipients, past or present, of community and transition funding have had any involvement in the activities, the ongoing activities around race violence in Belfast and other towns and cities?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. Certainly, if they have been, it has not been drawn to my attention. As you know, that the Department has been looking at all of those issues that give rise to and impacted around the race disorder and violence last summer. We are absolutely determined that we do not see a repeat of that, and that means working within communities to identify what went wrong, what are the attitudes, where are they coming from, and how they can be tackled.
Question 2 is withdrawn. I call Sinead Ennis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As part of the wider £3.2 million investment, £1.2 million has been allocated to the Regional Change Fund to support those organisations with the expertise to lead on driving society-wide action. The 8 community and voluntary sector organisations funded will bring years of experience and expertise, which will ensure that the projects delivered will make a difference. The Regional Change Fund will enable the organisations to expand prevention work across the whole of society and in all types of settings. That includes schools, communities, youth groups, sports clubs, prisons and beyond. This will help to ensure that everyone understands that violence against women and girls is, well, what it is and how to prevent it, so that together we can deliver meaningful change. The Regional Change Fund is in addition to the Local Change Fund that will see £2 million shared across all 11 council areas to support community networks, grassroots organisations and provide opportunities for all to play their part in tackling violence, harm and abuse against women and girls.
Ms Ennis.
I thank the Minister for her answer, and I want to acknowledge her efforts and that of the First Minister in making tackling violence against women and girls an executive priority and also a programme for government priority. Can the Deputy First Minister give details on why the 8 organisations that were chosen for the Regional Change Fund, why they were chosen? Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you. I thank the member for her supplementary question. Right from the outset, when this time last year Michelle and I took up these positions, we made very clear that this was a key priority for us. The levels of violence against women and girls here in Northern Ireland is appalling, and we need to tackle that and indeed eliminate all violence against women and girls. I am really pleased that it is a key aspect of the delivery from within our own department throughout the last year of not only producing the strategy, but of course that important delivery plan and seeing these important funds actually get out on the ground. We are working with those 8 delivery partners. They were very much those who advised us throughout this process. It was a collaborative design co-production process, and I think one that has worked extremely well. But these are the organisations designated to be experts in this particular field, and we believe that they are the right organisations to help and support us to deliver on this key initiative.
Anne Forsyth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Deputy First Minister for her answer so far. Today marks a year from these institutions were restored, and it was excellent to see that right at the outset violence against women and girls was recognised as a key priority. And I asked the Deputy First Minister, could she outline what work has been undertaken in this past year to end violence against women and girls in Northern Ireland?
Minister.
Thank you, and I thank the member for her question and for that very kind acknowledgement of the work that we have been carrying out. As I indicated in the earlier answer, there's been a significant amount. I want to pay a tribute to the team, the co-production team, and sitting within the Executive Office, but of course working across a number of different departments for the research that they carried out, for all of the incredible hard work, but most of all to those co-design partners who volunteered, very often volunteered their time to make this strategy and the delivery plan what it is. So we have launched that strategy, we launched that delivery plan as well. We also launched the Small Business RI Challenge Fund. That was very much about setting out 2 challenges and asking business and small organisations to consider what could meet that challenge, how could the outcomes that we desire be best met through that different type of initiative rather than just a grant funding scheme. We launched the Local Change Fund with local councils to allocate £2 million to support local grassroots groups. We launched the Regional Change Fund, and we supported just recently the local Power to Change campaign with Justice and the PSNI to promote bystander awareness and interventions.
Connie Egan.
I thank the Minister. You obviously know that changing attitudes is a large part of your Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. Would the Executive Office consider working with others in this Assembly for a code of practice for legislators as to what constitutes misogyny?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for her question. I haven't heard that proposal before, but certainly we will take it away and take a look at it and perhaps liaise with the member in terms of the detail of her proposal.
Deputy First Minister, 20 years ago on Thursday past, Robert McCartney was brutally stabbed to death by the IRA. In the aftermath of that murder, his sisters were subject to a campaign of intimidation by the Republican movement, which today you partner in government. Will the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy ensure that no other woman or girl will suffer the same intimidation as the McCartney sisters did?
Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question. It is an important one because I think when we look back over the decades of the Troubles here in Northern Ireland, violence and the targeting and the harassment, particularly towards women, but also we have to remember young people, children, those that were indiscriminately targeted by bombings, those young people who were subject to child abuse through punishment beatings by paramilitary organisations. And of course, I pay tribute to the many women who have been murdered by paramilitary and terrorist organisations as well. This all formed abuse and violence towards women and girls that was entirely and wholly unacceptable. I can stand here today and say very clearly that I condemn all of that activity. I indeed condemn all terrorist activity. There was never any justification for it. There still isn't. There was always an alternative.
Mark Durkan.
Question number 4.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Guard security and CCTV were put in place in Ebrington when the site was largely vacant and under development. Today, Ebrington is a thriving and, much like the city centre, a hub of activity with a wide range of both day and nighttime businesses. In the coming months, we will also see the launch of a number of different businesses, including Ernst & Young, arrive on the site. In 2026, the exciting launch of the Londonderry North Atlantic Museum will also take place. The Department remains committed to ensuring Ebrington continues to be a safe and shared space for everyone to enjoy, and the site will continue to be monitored 24 hours a day via the 34 CCTV cameras on site. This is in line with city centre arrangements, and further integration of Ebrington with the city will ensure Ebrington continues to play its part in the future growth of the city and region.
Mr Durkan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Deputy First Minister for her answer. There are concerns in my constituency that at the time when the overdue development of Ebrington is finally making tangible progress, with more people using the space as a place of employment and a place of leisure, that this decision will reduce safety for safe users, and that's been compounded by a few unsavoury incidents lately. It will also cost jobs at a site where we're trying to generate employment.
Question,
will
Mr.
the
Durgan.
ministers review this decision?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question, and of course we've received correspondence from a number of members, including his colleagues and mine, on this particular issue. Whenever this was put in place, you didn't have the same infrastructure. I am really pleased that £37 million have been invested in that Ebrington site, and I think anybody who goes up there can see the transformation that has taken place. That includes a number of businesses with their own security. The security that we had paid for centrally from the Executive Office was then being passed on to those residents and leases within the site who were already then taking their own measures. So my understanding is that there was a very strong sense that this was not needed. It's monitored, of course, by that CCTV. And of course, I want to emphasise that all of the evidence that we have is that this is a very safe site. And not, as he's rightly recognised, in fact, those visiting the site and enjoying the site and using the site has actually been increasing year on year, and that's very welcome as well.
And I thank the Deputy Minister for her answer so far. Would the Deputy First Minister agree with me that the Ebrington site is a key driver for the social and the economic regeneration of Derry and for the entire North West?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Look, absolutely. We made clear again from the outset and over the course of the last year how important it is that in the entire of Northern Ireland is a place that can thrive, and that just doesn't mean the Greater Belfast area. We want that, and we will ensure that that means every part of Northern Ireland, right from Fermanagh to the northwest and throughout. So of course Ebrington is a key economic driver of that. I think it's looking very, very well. It seems to have been a great success thus far. We will continue to work and invest in the site to ensure that it can maximise its potential.
Gary Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I welcome the investment by the Executive Office, not only in Ebrington, but in areas right across the Foyle constituency. And I thank the Deputy First Minister for her role in delivering those projects. Can I ask the Deputy First Minister maybe to provide an update on those investments by the Executive Office in my own constituency?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his question. The Department remains committed to the investment in the Londonderry area, with some $72 million invested in the area since 2016-17. That includes over $37 million to transform and regenerate Ebrington, which is now a hub of creative industries, cafes, restaurants, a hotel, microbrewery, hairdressers, healthcare and commercial offices. However, we've also invested an additional $34 million in a range of other programmes, and that includes urban villages and good relations projects to promote good relations. And indeed, the member will recall right back at the development of the urban village scheme that we had that conversation when I visited the city then as a junior minister. And he was a great champion for the Fountain area and the city at that time. And indeed, it is amazing how those conversations can lead to the development of programmes that genuinely bring that real difference to people's lives, with many, many millions of pounds through that work now taking place and to the benefit of the citizens of that city.
Declan Kearney. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As of 31st of January 2025, the HIA Redress Board has received 4,904 compliant applications and made determinations totalling over £100 million. A total of 56 applications are still to be determined by a panel. The turnaround time for validated applications is 7.5 weeks, with a success rate of over 88% of applications that fall within the Board's jurisdiction. The Executive Office has engaged closely with victims and survivors' representatives on enhancements to the wider redress process, including providing additional resources to the Victims and Survivors Service to ensure that applicants can be supported in a trauma-informed way with their statements of experience. As the final date for applications, the 2nd of April 2025, is fast approaching, we would encourage all victims and survivors who have not yet applied to contact the Commissioner for Survivors of Institutional Childhood Abuse as soon as possible for information and advice.
Mr. Kearney.
And I thank the Deputy First Minister for her answer. I noticed recently, Minister, that you and the First Minister met with a number of groups which for years have been working with those in need. Can you now give us an update in relation to the memorial for the victims and survivors of historical institutional abuse?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his question. And indeed, it has been an issue that not only we have been working on for some time, but indeed, Mr. Speaker, you yourself have been also engaged on this important matter. It was a recommendation leading out of Judge Hart's report. And it is one that we are very, very keen to see implemented as quickly as we can. We know that there's been a range of different views across the sector as to what that memorialisation looks like. But we met with them, I think, had a very good engagement, and we're hopefully moving forward at pace to find a resolution and to ensure that that memorialisation can happen within this building and, of course, elsewhere as well. I want to take the opportunity to pay tribute to the huge amount of work that those organisations have done for many years now, both in fighting to get the inquiry, but of course with working with victims and survivors and communicating the needs of that sector to both the First Minister and I and to others.
Austin Buckley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Deputy First Minister for her answers thus far. We all know that the legacy of institutional abuse continues to leave a dark cloud over many lives here in Northern Ireland. I welcome the progress in relation to the appropriate memorial, but does the Deputy First Minister accept that there is certain survivors that have criticised the Redress Board because of the re-traumatisation that it has caused, and is there appropriate action being taken to address this?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for that question. The Executive Office deals with many areas that are incredibly sensitive, and we have adopted what is often referred to as a trauma-informed response and approach to these issues. I'm disappointed to hear that that has been some victims' experience. Of course, the recounting of those experiences in itself is hugely traumatic, and I pay tribute to those victims' survivors that have come forward and have put themselves through that process. But there is that safety net there in terms of the support that is given. It's not just through the training, and all of the panel members are trained in that trauma-informed response and techniques. But of course we also have that funding going through the Victims and Survivors Service that is particular to support those victims and survivors going through this. So I would appeal to anybody who is feeling that you need support in this area to come forward, either to the Commissioner or to the Victims and Survivors Service, to get that help and support that is there for you.
Bradshaw.
And thank you, Deputy First Minister. You mentioned the work of the campaigners in terms of the historical institutional abuse, and you'll know that they very much are concerned that there are a lot of people who will not be able to submit an application for redress. Given that some of the years that the Redress Board have been up and running was the pandemic, when people weren't travelling or communicating, have you given any thought to extending the deadline so that you ensure that all people receive the justice that they deserve? Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for her question, and she will be aware that we are aware of this particular issue in her role as Chair of the Executive Committee and the communication around that. We are advised that in terms of the applications as a scheme that they have slowed down significantly, and that there is no indication at this stage that there is a demand out there for the extension of that in terms of the applications coming forward. Now, we do anticipate that as we head towards the 2nd of April 2025 date, that there will be a small increase in those applications, understandably, because perhaps those yet remaining will be, in light of the closure date, then be motivated to put in their applications in and around that time. But I can advise her that year on year, the applications process have decreased significantly. In 2024 to 25 year, we were down to 472 applications this year. We also have endeavoured, as she will be aware, throughout the period to publicise the scheme, including a leaflet through every single door in Northern Ireland, and working with the Commissioner in terms of online campaigns, international campaigns. So we are satisfied that we have done a significant job to publicise this scheme, but we will continue to monitor the situation just to assess to see if there is any further need.
Nicola Brogan.
Question number 6, please.
Minister.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I would ask Junior Minister Cameron to answer this question.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, we'd like to thank all those who responded to the 12-week consultation which closed in September 2024. The 269 responses were reviewed, and a draft report was then shared with the consultation forum to ensure that the terminology used was sensitive to victims and survivors, and a copy was also provided to the Executive Office Committee. A final consultation report was published on the Executive Office website in January this year, and while we are pleased with many areas of broad agreement, further discussions with Executive colleagues are needed on some complex and sensitive policy issues before the final decisions can be made. It's also important for us to continue to engage and listen with victims and survivors in this period. We hope to bring forward the legislation as soon as possible in this legislative year, and once pre-introduction steps have been completed. We remain committed, along with members of this House, to help victims and their loved ones get the answers and support that they deserve.
Brogan.
I thank the Junior Minister for her answer. Can the Junior Minister outline the next steps in the Truth Recovery Programme? Liddell.
Minister.
Thank you. I thank the member for the supplementary question. So in terms of the next steps for the Truth Recovery Programme, following executive consideration of final proposals, the draft legislation can be finalised. We can press ahead with the introduction of the requisite legislation. Meanwhile, work is ongoing to establish the practical requirements for the public inquiry and redress scheme. Alongside this, as part of the integrated investigation, the independent panel is taking testimony from victims and survivors, and working with the Public Record Office for Northern Ireland on the issues of access to records. So officials continue to engage with victims and survivors to keep them involved with and central to the process, and the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister look forward to meeting with them in the coming weeks.
Neil McAllister.
Answer so far. Given the consultation really outlined that there is no consensus around the redress scheme, and given the importance that it must proceed and that time is of the essence to victims and survivors, is the Minister able to outline today when the redress scheme will proceed?
Minister.
Thank you. I thank the member for that very important question. In terms of that, we're not in a position at this stage to provide a definite timeline for the opening of the standardised payment, as we need to follow the Executive and Assembly processes to pass the required legislation. However, we remain committed to progressing this work at pace and are keen to ensure that victims and survivors receive financial redress as soon as possible.
Justin McDulday.
Minister, in June, you and your colleague, the First Minister, committed to bringing forward legislation on these issues by the end of 2024. Do you regret missing this deadline, and what are the implications for people impacted because of you missing the deadline?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member for the question. There are some finalisations happening in terms of this, and we do appreciate even that in terms of the independent panel, some victims and survivors may not choose to come forward to the independent panel, but we must respect that, and it's an important part of the agreed process. There's a clear value and expertise in that non-statutory independent panel that can provide. Obviously, the focus of the independent panel is on gathering the oral testimony and the archival records to examine the evidence and develop the conclusions on what happened. In terms of the testimony, the panel announced recently that the closing date to register and provide oral testimony is Thursday, the 1st of May. To date, over 100 people have shared their testimony with the panel, and would encourage anyone who has knowledge or experience of the relevant institutions to come forward. In terms of extension, the 6-month extension, we've agreed the panel's request for the 6-month extension to its tenure, and recognise that the importance of ensuring as many people as possible can engage in the first stage of the integrated education investigation.
Cara Hunter.
Number 7, please.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The programme of government will represent the shared vision of the Executive. It is important, therefore, that all members of the Executive are given the opportunity to consider and agree any new commitments to be included in the PFG before they are announced to the Assembly. That said, the draft programme for government sets out a number of commitments aimed at reducing poverty for people of all ages, including children and young people. The commitments within the programme of government include key areas such as health, housing and growing the economy, all of which will help reduce poverty. These include additional support for families struggling with the cost of childcare, support for people affected by fuel poverty, investment in new homes, and improved support for people wanting to build skills and work in better jobs. What's more, the Department of Communities are in the process of developing the anti-poverty strategy, which will minimise the risk and impact of poverty and to help all in our communities, including children and young people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Deputy First Minister. We're a year in to the Executive now, and last week the High Court in Belfast said the Executive's lack of an anti-poverty strategy was appalling. Thousands of children across Northern Ireland today are using food banks. Deputy First Minister, are you ashamed it hasn't been brought forward yet, and when do you believe that it will be brought forward?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the opportunity to make clear that the absence of a strategy does not mean that there is not a significant amount of work that is occurring right throughout every department to tackle poverty. I know that from speaking to my colleague Gordon Lyons, who supports everything from Sure Starts to neighbourhood renewal, but every single department in terms of the schemes within the Department of Education, the Uniform Financial Support Scheme. There are many, many hundreds of schemes throughout government that support those in poverty. And I was glad actually when I saw just a number of days ago the Joseph Rowntree report reporting that Northern Ireland currently has the lowest levels of poverty in children and young people across the United Kingdom. But the levels are still too high and we want those levels to reduce further, and that is why there is this commitment We know, for example, the cost of childcare takes a huge amount of money out of hard-pressed families. A scheme rolled out already in terms of key actions, but that will be enhanced, will support and improve that. We know the lack of affordable housing and social housing is a significant impact in relation to the outcomes of those on lower income brackets and their families. So all of these issues will be designed to support people, but I can assure the member that we are doing everything in our power across a wide range of actions. A strategy will support that, but a strategy is not the first step. Those actions are happening right now.
Moving on to topicals, call Matthew O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, it's a one-year anniversary. I presume I won't have an anniversary card for my 1 year as Leader of the Opposition in the post. But in the programme for government, it says that the Executive will cut waiting times. Given we're 1 year in and people out there want to know when the health service will be fixed, can you explain when waiting times will be cut?
Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his question. 1 year in, and we have a determination to deliver against those key priorities, and that must mean a reduction in relation to health waiting lists. We understand that there has been a small reduction across a number of those health waiting lists, but it is not enough. We know it is unacceptable that too many people are waiting on those health waiting lists for too long. This is a key priority in the draft programme for government for a reason, because we know that this is an issue that matters to people. This is an issue that we have a determination to work with the Health Minister to reduce, and indeed over the course of the next year and the next number of years, that is what we will be focusing on.
First Minister, is there's no clear plan or target for cutting waiting times, and the reason that is important is, like a whole range of other things, whether it's the absence of an anti-poverty strategy, whether it's the failure to produce any form of serious intervention on wastewater, it appears to the public out there in Northern Ireland that you and your colleague, the First Minister, are marking time, doing photo opportunities in lieu of taking decisions to improve their lives. So please, Deputy First Minister, can you tell people, just for one out there, when specifically will waiting times fall?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as outlined, waiting lists have already begun to fall across a number of areas, but more must be done. It must be done more quickly, and we will be doing everything that we can to support the Minister of Health. He is bringing forward further plans and proposals. Some of those are being discussed currently in terms of what they can do. We are currently discussing these issues, of course, with the Finance Minister and across the Executive in terms of not only the resources that is required, but how best to achieve deliverables on that. That is why we are establishing a delivery unit. That is why we are looking not just across the United Kingdom, but indeed internationally for the mechanisms that will support getting delivery against this important issue. We know it matters to people. We are determined to deliver on it, and absolutely that means identifying what the problem is, identifying the right solutions and supporting it financially, and that's the work that we've been getting on with.
Ms. Sheeran.
Agus Gormagat Lishan Prilas Kiraira Fania Fragration. Deputy First Minister, could you provide an explanation for the delay in introducing a new funding model for North-South bodies, including Forest na Gaeilge and the Ulster Scots Agency? Forest na Gaeilge have obviously just last week had to announce a reduction in funding for local organisations that do amazing work in their communities, despite increasing pressure in recent years.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know the details specifically of what she's talking about, but I understand that she may be referring to a proposal from the Minister of Finance in relation to alternative funding mechanisms for North-South bodies. I can assure the member that these things have all been previously discussed and agreed. There is a careful balance in all of these things, and the balance around the contribution north and south to these bodies is to ensure that the work that happens within those bodies is also balanced in terms of the north-south aspects of those. I understand that the Finance Minister perhaps is proposing to break that and indeed to facilitate the South to increase their contribution without that being linked to Northern Ireland's contribution. That is not something that I am in agreement with. So therefore it is not blocked. There's simply not agreement with that proposal at this stage. But we'll continue to engage with her if indeed that is what the member is referring to. But of course it is important to remember in this place there will be some things that we don't agree with. And of course the Executive is all about trying to find a consensus and a consensus way through, and we will endeavour to do that because I believe thus far we have been able to do that.
Ms. Sheeran.
Will the Deputy First Minister commit to bringing a proposal for the new funding model to the next executive meeting, which could bring vital funding to both the Ulster Scots Agency and Forres na Gaeilge?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can only speak for myself, but to be absolutely clear, if I wasn't in the initial answer, if the only alternative funding model that is on the table is one that breaks the balance between the contributions between the Republic of Ireland Government and the Northern Ireland Government and North-South bodies, then that is not something that I am in agreement with. I am in agreement with that being balanced across the two jurisdictions. That gives both jurisdictions that a balanced say in terms of both the activities and the funding model. That has been the agreed model thus far, and I see no reason to change this at this stage, and indeed I see challenges in changing that because the member may not be aware, but a number of years ago, of course, there had to be a reduction from the contribution by the Irish Government because of budget constraints that they had faced at that time, and we had to work with them on that. I understand that that may be what she is referring to, but of course if it is not, I am happy to follow up on her questions in writing after this.
Colin Crawford.
I thank the Deputy First Minister for answers thus far. Deputy First Minister, we're just over 1 week on now from the storm, which we all experienced and its damage and effects. Can I ask you for your assessment on how the Executive Office responded to the storm and the side effects that it caused?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his question. Indeed, it has been an incredibly busy week. Not least for those that have been out on the ground in all weathers, working hard to restore power, to get the water systems reconnected in terms of clearing trees and roads and obstructions. And I firstly want to pay tribute to all of those workers that have worked so tirelessly to do such a mammoth task. This was unprecedented. Some 100,000 more disconnections in terms of electricity than NIE networks had ever faced before. So there was a mammoth task. He will be aware that as soon as we heard and had advice around the incoming storm, we moved immediately to try to send a very clear message to the people of Northern Ireland to stay home and to stay safe. And indeed, we carried out 2 press conferences on Thursday to try to emphasise that. The Executive moved quickly in terms of the closure of schools, requiring schools to close. We sent a very clear message to civil service, public sector, to businesses to work from home if at all possible and avoid going out. I think for those who woke up on Friday morning and heard the storm outside, they recognised actually how bad it was, and it is absolutely miraculous that there were not people who were injured or worse in terms of that storm, and I'm very thankful for that. But of course the last 10 days has very much been about the focus on recovery and response, and we've been doing everything in our power to make sure that the reconnections happened as quickly as possible, and we identified those issues. I do want to pay tribute to Pat McFadden, the Cabinet Minister, and the entire team in the UK Government that did respond as well to our request for help, and that was everything from generators to water, to helicopters to support those lines, to chainsaws, tree cutters, and electrical engineers. So look, there was a huge effort put into this, and I pay tribute to all of those workers who made it happen.
Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Deputy First Minister, I think we would all echo our thanks and appreciation. Can I ask, has your department any plans to update emergency response plans for any other extreme weather events, like any other storms or flooding or severe snow in the future?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think there will certainly be learning from this. I think the civil contingencies frameworks that we stood up immediately worked very well. In a red alert, it is the PSNI that takes the lead, and then that moves over to the relevant departmental leads depending on the particular issue. I felt that there was very good communication both internally, and we obviously tried to be at the forefront of leading with that external communication as well. We were in regular contact with NIE, with NI Water and others throughout that period of time, but I do think that there is learning from this. So for example, the fact that the electricity was off had an impact not just on electricity and heating within homes, but on the water connections and on communications and mobile connectivity. So these are big issues that, I think looking forward in terms of our civil contingencies planning, we need to take into account and make sure that we have those contingencies at hand for when the unexpected happens.
Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my colleague had snatched my question from beneath me there, but to follow on from that, Deputy First Minister, could I thank you for your role in coordinating response to Storm Owen, and ask, there seem to be some concerns around how vulnerable the blue light services would have been had the executive not taken immediate action to secure that. In light of that vulnerability, which would no doubt concern many citizens, is there any particular plans we have to ensure that in a similar situation in future that communications will always be maintained for those services?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, he is absolutely right. That communications between our blue light services, but also the communication between people in their homes without water, without electricity, to the likes of the ambulance service and to police, that is absolutely critical when you hit this type of a storm event or a crisis. So I think this is something that we need to urgently look at. We understand that a number of the mobile towers went down because of the lack of connectivity to electricity, but the communications issue is a big one. And should that mean that there is a backup of battery packs and generators in the relevant areas, but there has to be a number of contingencies, because it is absolutely critical that our police, ambulance, fire service, emergency services are able to communicate. But of course, that those vulnerable people in their homes that may need an ambulance or may need emergency care, that they are able to get through and get to speak to the right people at the right time in order to get them that help in a crisis.
Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, and you've rightly spoken about the support that we've received from across the UK during this particular incident. Will we be looking at best practice across the UK and elsewhere to see what we can do to implement here in terms of that?
Thank you. As the member may be aware, we held an emergency executive meeting on Friday evening to get a good sense from across the departments as to what the impact may be. There were impacts, I think, on all of the departments in terms of either damage to buildings or an interruption of service due to the lack of electricity. That was a very useful engagement, and indeed the executive endorsed and committed to reaching out to the UK government for that additional support. That is on the basis of mutual aid. Those mechanisms are there under civil contingencies to try to ensure that each place can get what it needs when it needs it. And I have to say, we spoke to the Prime Minister on Saturday afternoon. We had and participated in what was called a Cobra M. So this is a UK level ministerial meeting chaired by the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Pat McFadden, who was absolutely, I had to say, I put it on tribute again, he was excellent in terms of his responsiveness to what we asked for. He was very responsive in terms of that coordination across UK government ministers in terms of getting us that aid as well. In terms of the electricity companies, an awful lot of that is done through other commercial companies, but there's no doubt that the political will, both I think from here, but particularly from a UK-wide level, really helped to get those electrical engineers, those additional people. You know, they were on the ferry on Saturday night, on their way to Northern Ireland to help and support, and we are hugely thankful to all of those people who came from Great Britain and beyond to help the people of Northern Ireland.
Cheryl Brownlee.
Thank you to the Deputy First Minister for her answer so far. So it's often been said that Northern Ireland is the most dangerous place for women in the whole of Europe. Can you confirm the accuracy of this statement?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for her important question. She will be aware that ending violence against women and girls is that priority issue for us. But we've met with a number of agencies with their own team, and actually with the PSNI very recently. I am pleased to say that that statistic is not accurate. It was based on some flawed data. Our levels are too high, but it is not the case that we are the most dangerous place in Northern Ireland for women and girls. And I hope that that gives the women and girls of Northern Ireland some assurance as well, because I know when I was speaking to people, this very much caused a huge amount of concern. And the question that was always asked to us was, why is that the case? Our levels are too high. We want to eliminate violence against women and girls, and we will continue to try to push those actions right across local government, central government, in schools, and also right across society to say, this is wrong, we need to stop it now.
Ms. Brownlee.
No women or girls at all should ever feel any fear here, obviously in Northern Ireland. But I just want to touch on those with additional needs or disabilities and just ask the Deputy First Minister, how is the Executive supporting them moving forward to ensure that they are also protected, heard and listened to within the document?
Deputy First Minister.
Thank you. I thank the member for her question. It's really important in terms of all of our consultations, and particularly as we move towards a co-production, co-design process, that we include the maximum number of people and groups of people to be part of that, because it's important that we feed in at that early policy development stage the needs of and the particular perspectives of groups, including those with the disabilities and those with particular needs. So that is something that is very much mainstreamed within the department, but likewise we need to ensure that that is also mainstreamed right throughout. So it's with our community organisations, it's with our local councils, it's with our funding schemes to make sure that this is a consideration, because it is a vital aspect of this. Because when we look at, should it be care homes with older people, should it be in different types of facilities or situations, that perhaps some of those people are the least able to speak out or to be heard when they are raising these concerns. So it's vitally important that there are support mechanisms there to ensure that they also are part of this campaign.
Time has elapsed. Thank you, Deputy First Minister. We now move to questions to the Minister for Justice, and I call Linda Dillon.
Question number 1.